Lively and unrehearsed, it's our weekly discussion program, Moral Side of the News, and we're glad you're alongside. I'm John Blim with the WHAS Crusade for Children. With me, as usual, is a distinguished panel. Dr. John Slider, Breckenridge Chapel Free Methodist. Reverend Clay Calloway, West Louisville Ministers Coalition. Rabbi Stan Miles, Louisville Melton School. And Father Joe Graffis, Archdiocese of Louisville. We start today's conversation with the death penalty. This week, the Justice Department asked the U.S. Supreme Court to reinstate the death sentence for Boston Marathon bomber Jahar Tsarnaev, even though the Justice Department has suspended all federal executions and President Biden has vowed to eliminate capital punishment. As you recall, Tsarnaev was convicted for the 2013 attack that killed 3 people and injured more than 200. So turning to our panel on Moral Side of the News, let's hear where you weigh in on this topic.
So I'm confused. Are they for it or against it? I mean, I'm just.
I think that there is confusion here, John, in the sense that evidently, obviously, they instated the death penalty, and then an appeal court removed the death penalty. Now the Justice Department, if I understand this correctly, is saying you need to reinstate the death penalty because the people of Boston chose that. And I'm not sure of that logic at all, but anyway, so that's what they're asking, and it could go to the Supreme Court about that.
And yet the president
the irony also is that the Justice Department has stopped all federal executions, at least for a while, and President Biden said he personally has challenges or problems, as a good Catholic should, with the death penalty. So this is a very confusing case as I read through it, trying to figure out what's the logic that's going on here.
Yeah, it sounds sort of politically selective to me. And it sounds, Joe, from your recap, that they could sentence him to death and then not executing. I mean,
and that was brought up in the article that, so you're saying you could reinstitute it, but then if you guys get rid of the death penalty,
we won't do it.
We won't do it.
And I, do we reserve the death penalty for? I mean, I don't like the idea of the argument was, well, the people of Boston demanded this. Well, that I just don't like the image of however it is of the crowd demanding off with their heads, and it just, there's a lot of unseemliness and inappropriateness and whatever is going on at the Justice Department. So
one other thing that I think, if I read the story correctly, that was confusing is they said, but this is different than the standard death penalty case. Joe Blow happened to murder someone in a grocery store, because this is a terrorist activity. Therefore, that makes it different. And it's like,
well, the result's the same.
Yeah, but
so I'll let everybody else talk, but I don't like the idea of that'll be a first of responding to popular will at the moment in assigning the death penalty and just reserving it for people we really, really don't like. I'm saying that in air quotes too. So I'll be quiet and listen here.
Well, I must weigh in. I'm going to weigh in on just John Slider's comment.
Oh, thank you. Let's make it about me.
I'm surprised that not just the moral compass appears to be pointing in the right direction, but the tone and the compassion appears to be pointing in the right direction. I think I agree with you, John, and I think we need to record this and probably post it online that I agree with John Slider. In this instance, I think when you respond to even though this is a democracy, of course, but the pitchfork and the torch response of the demands of the crowd is something to be concerned about. Of course, we who are Christians know that Jesus perished in the similar conditions. So I think that because of the roar of the crowd and responding to the crowd in this particular instance with Boston would be a cause for pause for me. I think that this issue of death penalty, of course, has been ping-ponged back and forth politically for many years. And the fact that there appears to be a kind of a schizophrenic response here with the Justice Department saying no, and now they're saying yes. President Biden saying no, and then yes. So it appears to be some double-mindedness or schizophrenic behavior here with this particular case. Father Graffis, they could be, as you mentioned, they could be focusing on the fact that it is a so-called terrorist attack that makes this a bit different. Well, maybe, but I think that regardless of what the particular circumstances are, I think that the high moral ground should be taken in any case. I think the country of Israel has led the way in terms of abolishing the death penalty. Either you're going to abolish it or you're not. Either you're going to be against it or you're not. So no matter how despicable, how horrendous, how disturbing the particular crime may be, either you're against the death penalty or you're not. So I think hopefully this might bring this back into the fore, that we can settle this issue, this schizophrenic debate about the death penalty and put it to rest. And hopefully this might be the case to make that happen.
Let's take the citizens of Boston out of the mix, okay? They're gone. They're off the table. What I haven't heard from this panel is any discussion of the act itself. We have two brothers who wanted to cause mass murder. And so they devised these bombs with shrapnel, and they placed them where there were crowds of people, not soldiers, not police, men, women, and children watching an athletic event. I think that what the act they performed, yes, we label it as terrorism. Granted, it's terrorism. It's also an act of calculated mass murder. Indiscriminate mass murder. And so I want to see a punishment. I would like to feel that the death penalty is off the table. I'd like to live in that world. I don't. If we could be sure that the living perpetrator who committed this crime would have a sentence of life in prison with absolutely, positively no chance for parole.
Not only no chance, I'm interject something here. I thought about something. I ran across one of my favorite movies. It was called Mars Attacks. And the reason I bring that up is that these Martians, if you remember the storyline of that movie.
Tim Burton's Mars Attacks?
Mars Attacks. I'm going to share with you an illustration. Okay. Is that these Martians, they tried every weapon they could against these Martians to destroy them. But the one thing that totally destroyed these Martians was playing country music. It just destroyed them. So, I mean, there are sentences worse than death, like making them listen to country music, I mean, there's all kind of creative ways of exacting punishment short of death. And I'm saying that to achieve whatever ends you want to, first of all, they're no longer going to be a threat. They're never, ever going to be a threat again. So we're assured of that. So there's all kinds of ways to secure justice without producing death to achieve that justice. And I think that even though I use a rather bizarre illustration, but there are so many other ways of achieving our result. First and foremost is to guarantee safety. If you want to be, that's what the cross was about. The cross was a billboard to discourage people from ever wanting to do crime again. So if you want to make a point, some dramatic point about executing somebody, well, okay, if that's your purpose, then go do it. But I think that we should be moving far beyond that and still secure the safety of the citizens, which I think we already have today. There's other ways you can guarantee that it won't happen again and discourage others from doing it without creating another execution to achieve that end.
Well, Stan, I think we didn't talk about the crime because we're all pretty much in agreement that the crime was beyond abhorrent. I'm questioning the purpose of life imprisonment with no chance of parole. What the difference would be, except, well, I don't know what the difference would be from that and a death penalty. I mean, that pretty well removes, both would remove a person from society, would shelter society from any further actions by these individuals, would hopefully have a ripple effect for other people who are trying to do the same, though maybe not the same crime. Either way, the argument for life in prison without the chance of parole is pretty well the same argument for the death penalty.
But let me explain where I'm coming from, John.
Sure, I
am disturbed about the case of John Hinckley Jr.,
who got out, recently released,
who attempted to assassinate President Ronald Reagan. He failed, thank God. He shot Brady, Jim Brady.
Yeah.
And Jim Brady ultimately died of his wounds.
Yeah.
And he had I think he had a sentence of life in prison. And all of a sudden, he's old, he's harmless, he's back in society.
Well,
also,
I don't think he was life in prison.
Well.
I think he had some sort of mental facility thing, so it was not strictly life in prison. But I could be incorrect on that. Yeah, he's out. So, and I don't get your point in argument in relation to what I was saying, Stan.
I think this issue gets very complicated as you've laid out. It's interesting, in my own tradition of the Catholic tradition, 50 plus years ago, almost 60 years ago, I remember having to debate this in high school class. And I had, you have to argue both sides. And I had to say to myself, gosh, I don't quite understand. I was more comfortable being against the death penalty than for the death penalty, for lots of the reasons. And it's interesting how our church has over these years has gone from, it's permissible under certain cases. Oh, it should be rarely used. It should be almost never used, until our present Holy Father Francis said, I see no circumstances in which it should be used. Looking at other options about death penalty, life without parole, and then you have to look at several different things. Can a person be rehabilitated after 10 years, 15 years, 30 years? Some people can, and there's been evidence of that. If they can be rehabilitated, then they ought to be able to be released to society. If they can't be, if they've got a mental illness or something, then they shouldn't be released to society. So there's lots of strains of this, but as John Slider said, this case, it seems like they muddy the waters, and it doesn't help the death penalty arguments either way, because you're like, well, this case is a little more serious than that case, therefore it applies. Wait a minute, that makes no sense to me. Or, well, the crowd liked it, and we shouldn't overcome the crowd. There's a lot of fuzzy thinking in the arguments, it seems to me, the lawyers used here.
The crowd argument, to me, is why we have change of venue.
Well, yeah, and the crowd argument is also why we have judges and jurors and not the current system we have. And it still is, of course, not perfect. We could look back on, well, we could look back and understand that. And Joe, I hear what you're saying about the comfort level in life in prison without the chance of parole. Compared to the death penalty, it makes us feel better. But I wonder if that's a way to evaluate the morality of a particular stance on the death penalty. Just because something makes me feel better doesn't necessarily mean, and I'm not making fun of
I don't think that's the question. I think the question is, I mean, taking another person's life because they took somebody's life, are we justified in doing that? Now we can put the person in prison, which is pretty much like life,
taking their life,
parole,
yeah.
but still, they still have a life. They still have a possibility of rehabilitating themselves, whether they ever get out or not.
Well, yeah, the chance that the state, and we probably don't. I mean, we're dug in as to where we are on this. Without any chance of parole, pretty much ends a person's involvement in society, ends their life. And even, I guess, without the chance of parole means that even if exculpatory evidence is found, they still have no chance of parole. So to me, it's as final as a death penalty.
And it in effect is a social death.
Yeah, that's what I was. Yeah, good way. You
right.
said it well, I think.
It's a social death, and one of the worst punishments within the prison system is solitary confinement. So there's a lot of ways of achieving it without taking a life.
Well,
the question of
but
whether
my argument is why not? Not why not, but what's the difference? But the question is whether I could apply the argument as the same thing as no chance of parole for life.
You could, but the issue, but I think Father Graffis brought up the issue about whether we justify it. Now, the government is the only person that is justified to take a life. I mean, that's a provision there that they have the jurisdiction, they have the power, the authority to exact death, and that's an ordained power, and it really is a protection for society that they are the only ones that have that authority. So, but whether you can do it does not always mean you should do it. I think that's the question. That we who are on the moral side will always be arguing just because you can does not mean you should.
Certainly.
Okay, panel, off to a good start on this edition of Moral Side of the News. Thanks for watching and listening to our viewers and listeners. We know him as Star Trek's Captain James T. Kirk. And this week, William Shatner finally traveled to the final frontier. Isn't that how he said it? And became the oldest person to go to space. He said it was moving. The experience has been something unbelievable. Shatner and his 3 crewmates returned to Earth aboard Blue Origin's rocket after a 10-minute suborbital flight. So, panel, I want to hear your thoughts on these casual trips to space that are coming more and more frequently.
Well, they're not more and more frequently for poor people. They're more and more frequent for people of privilege. So let's qualify that. And then Captain Kirk being 90 years old, I'm glad he's 90, but a lot of poor people would never have the privilege or the provision to see 90 years old because they don't have the health care, et cetera, to live that long. So I'm glad that this is, I'm glad and sad. I like William Shatner, always have. He's a likable person. He's a made-for-TV person back then, and he's still popular today. So this is really a marketing opportunity as much as anything. It's a made-for-TV production. What real redeeming value for mankind? I have yet to see that. It appears to be yet another episode where privilege and prosperity is being promoted as something that should be aspired by the average person. That simply is not true. So, I mean, it makes for good entertainment, but that's the extent of it, in my opinion.
When these flights started, I thought, well, it's nice to know what people are doing with their unlimited disposable income. Mm-hmm. But it's nice, it's harmless. And for the people who are doing it, Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, It's the ultimate act of grandstanding.
Yeah, Clay, you'll be happy to know that you and I pretty well agree on two subjects now.
Oh, okay. Well, the end is near, John.
Yeah,
The end is near. Right.
Or for you,
the rapture's coming.
For you, Clay, the beginning. I do think you made William Shatner's life, or day anyway, all the compliments you showered on him. You've got a wide range of who's poor in this world as to who, if your threshold is people who can afford to pay to go into space, or have someone pay to go into space. There's a lot of poor people. I struggle to find. I appreciate my two colleagues and brothers who have found a moral hook on this story. I'm really struggling to find it.
Well, let me share one with you. Would you rather see
please.
Bezos, Musk, and Sir Richard Branson do something else with their money? Let's say it that way. How's that?
I'd rather see them do something else with their employees that made them so rich. That's what I would like to see them do with their money. I would like the gap between the haves and the have-nots be narrowed, and so that's what I would like to see them do. Do justice by their workers. That's what I would like to see.
And listening to Shatner talk about the experience, I was kind of moved by what he said. As some of you know, there's a whole kind of new study in theology these days called the new cosmology, and talking about space and the intricacies of space and what does this tell us about God and all that kind of stuff. And it is fascinating stuff. And while I'm sure he's not read any of New Cosmology, some of the points he said in his experience was telling us, gosh, I realize I'm just a little fleck on the world compared to the whole planet and the whole universe. So I really appreciated what he said with that. And I wish we could get him or people like that to reflect on, as many of the astronauts did when back in the 60s. That being said, I think we're so desperate for money right now for so many things, whether it's infrastructure in our country, healthcare, all across the board, for poor people in many different places, trying to, this seems to be a little extravagant and kind of playboyish to be able to say, oh, well, I got to spend 10 minutes in space and that cost me how many millions of dollars for those 10 minutes. That seems not a good moral proportionality.
I want to know what seminary you attended, Joe, when you had that class on God and all that stuff. But I think these folks have the right to spend their money as they wish as individuals, including create all those jobs.
That too, I made me think about, because I'm old enough. You probably, John, also. From the 60s and 70s, Jimi Hendrix had an album called "Are You Experienced?" and he had a line in, I think, one of those songs, "Excuse me while I kiss the sky," and terms like "far out," all those kind of spaced out terms from our era seem to have a clear focus with this whole experience with William Shatner going to space. And there's a lot of ways you get spaced out. In fact, we had a guy from my college days, we called Spaceman because he was so spaced out all the time. A lot of ways you could have an experience that could be much less expensive than this experience, that I think would be much more humane, responsible, et cetera, et cetera. That concerns me, is that this experience is so unlike the experience of most humanity, that the only way they can experience it because of extreme wealth and opulence that can propel it into outer space. And for that, I see the great disparity there that is just highlighted and underscored by this whole phenomenon with him going to space.
Very good. By the way, Mr. Bezos has $100 million in sales already for people who want to do just that. Let's move on to our third topic. It's a sweet time of the year with Halloween just around the corner. In Kentucky, get this, Reese's Peanut Butter Cups dethrone Swedish Fish as the state's top trick-or-treating choice. Starburst tops the list in Indiana, Blow Pops in Ohio, and Tootsie Pops in Tennessee. Panel, what candy is on your list as tops this Halloween? Go ahead, Clay.
I believe in being incarnate. I buy Reese cups in industrial sizes in the Calloway house. One won't do. You got to buy them. You got to get them.
Oh,
I
get one in that box. Okay.
Industrial size Reese cups, not for trick or treat, but for my indulgence and pleasure in my house. I got coffee and Reese cups. Those are my two addictions here in this household.
Sounds like a new food group there. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's got peanut butter in it, so it has
yeah.
A couple of years ago, I was teaching a group of teenagers at the camp that I work at, and the classes, they had been working all day, and my class went from 9 to 10 p.m. And I asked them what they would like, and it was universal. They wanted Swedish fish, and there were maybe a dozen kids in the class. And I bought a 5-pound bag of Swedish fish, which they managed to eat in 45 minutes. I had a Swedish fish, and it was all right. I mean, it wasn't bad, but it wasn't as far from wonderful. I agree with Clay. I definitely would go with the Reese cup, but with one caveat. Never at room temperature. Always put them in the freezer.
Okay.
In the freezer. Okay.
And I think those Swedish fish, you can stuff them in your ears and not hear anything. So maybe your students were doing that.
I'll go with Hershey Kisses.
Yeah. I honestly, for the last 2-3 years, haven't had any candy. I'll go ice cream. Kay, I'll go halvesies with you on this subject, though. Coffee.
Yeah. That's a central staple.
Coffee.
Yeah, that'd be a life sentence for me to live without coffee. You just go ahead and just deprive me of coffee, and you can save whatever you're gonna save on the electrocution, because I will die.
I'll write that down so we'll remember that, Clay, for you.
Death without coffee.
And thank you, Reverend Clay Calloway, for tying topic 1 with topic 3 as we conclude this edition of Moral Side of the News. Thank you, Clay Calloway,
sermon.
John Slider, Stan Miles, and Joe Graffis. Thank you for watching and listening to this edition of Moral Side of the News. We'll be back again next week. Until then, so long. Thanks a lot, panel. You can watch this or any episode of Moral Side of the News on YouTube. Just go to youtube.com and search for Moral Side of the News.